Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the 15th webinar in the Offshore Wind series, Learning from the Experts. I am Layla Eleshmawi, Project Manager with NYCERDA's Offshore Wind team, and it is my pleasure to be joined by today's experts, David Whipple with Empire State Development, Katie Newcombe with the Center for Economic Growth, Nse Esema with New York City Economic Development Corporation, and Mariah Dignan with Climate Jobs New York. This panel will be giving a short joint presentation on economic development brought in by the offshore wind industry in New York. Before I introduce our speakers, a few reminders for participants and some background on this webinar series. Next slide, please. Firstly, if you're experiencing any technical issues, please contact Sal Graven at the email address on the bottom of the slide. This webinar is being recorded, and the recordings and presentation slides for all webinars in the Learning from the Experts series will be available on NYCERDA's website at the address on this slide. All participants have been muted. We will have time for questions and answers following the presentation, so please use the Q&A function on WebEx to submit your questions for our panelists. Next slide, please. New York State is working to advance the responsible and cost-effective development of at least 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2035. Offshore wind is a critical component in achieving the state's goals of 70% renewable sources of electricity by 2030 and 100% zero emissions electricity generation by 2040. While offshore wind has been providing clean energy to other parts of the world for several decades now, this industry is brand new to New Yorkers. To provide interested stakeholders and members of the public with accessible, impartial information and opportunities for engagement on specific topics of interest, NYCERDA is hosting this educational webinar series called Learning from the Experts to connect the public with independent experts in key topics in offshore wind. We endeavor to select Learning from the Experts speakers based on their expertise, not necessarily for an alignment of opinions with NYCERDA or the state of New York. So if you would like to suggest a topic or a speaker for a future webinar, you can email us at offshore-wind@nyserda.ny.gov. Please note that the views and opinions expressed in this presentation are those of the presenters. Next slide, please. It is now my pleasure to introduce David Whipple, Katie Newcombe, Nse Esema, and Mariah Dignan. David Whipple is the Director of Industry Development at Empire State Development, which is the economic development arm of the New York State government. David leads Empire State Development's efforts in creating jobs and attracting investment in the renewable energy and clean tech sectors. Katie Newcombe is the Chief Economic Development Officer at the Center for Economic Growth and has more than a decade of economic development experience spanning multiple states, public, private, and nonprofit sectors. She currently leads the Center for Economic Growth's business attraction and expansion activities. Nse Esema is currently the Vice President of Smart and Sustainable Cities at the New York City Economic Development Corporation. She designs and implements programmatic and strategic efforts to catalyze emerging sectors, develop inclusive industry ecosystems, and advance equitable economic development. You can also catch Nse speaking about turbine assembly in New York City in NYCERDA's new offshore wind video. Mariah Dignan serves as the Long Island lead for Climate Jobs New York, a growing statewide labor coalition representing 2.6 million working New Yorkers. She is a member of WindWorks Long Island, which is a coalition of environmental, labor, clergy, and community groups, and the force behind educating Long Islanders on the benefits of renewable energy, particularly offshore wind. So we have an amazing panel representing many diverse interests across all of New York State. So I'm very eager to pass off to our first speaker, David Whipple, to kick us off. Go ahead, David.
Hi, Layla. Thank you for that introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. And I'd like to say first off that I'm very honored to be here with you today talking about the economic benefits of offshore wind for New York. Right now, world leaders are in Glasgow for the UN Climate Change Conference, talking about how we can reach as a world our climate initiatives. And although transitioning away from fossil fuels will certainly bear costs, there's significant economic benefits that are going to come from creating a new industry right here in New York. The way that I see it, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to build thousands of jobs while reaching 100% zero emissions electricity by 2040. I'd like to applaud New York State for its bold leadership with the Climate Act of 2019, and also to applaud NYSERDA for its role in executing our targets in wind, solar, and energy storage. Right now, New York has the largest pipeline for offshore wind in the United States with 9 gigawatts by 2035. That is a huge market that will create nearly 10,000 jobs for New Yorkers. Next slide, please. And you can advance one more. To put this in perspective, New York's target of 9,000 megawatts, or in other words, 9 gigawatts, is nearly 1/3 of the entire US target, the federal government's target of 30 gigawatts, and is enough power to supply 6 million homes with electricity. Next slide. So thinking about powering 6 million homes, with wind turbines, we're going to need a lot of them. And to meet our goals, New York, in the end, will likely have nearly 1,000 wind turbines. Each of these has to stand for 30 years or more in the salty and windy conditions in the Atlantic Ocean. And they're nearly 3 times as tall as the Statue of Liberty. So building these will require a lot of materials, a lot of components, really thousands of components, and maintaining them will require a lot of jobs in operations and maintenance. So people going out, on the ocean to service these wind turbines. And so all of those factors add up to represent economic opportunities for New Yorkers. And so far, just the projects that are already underway, offshore wind is on track to create 6,800 jobs and $12.1 billion in economic activity. Next slide, please. So to expand on that, what results have come from these nation-leading targets for offshore wind? Well, New York has 5 project areas off the coast of Long Island, which are in active development, and 5 port facilities that are also under active development. There will be manufacturing at the Port of Albany and the Port of Queens in the capital region. There additionally will be staging at the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal. And operations and maintenance and training will occur at Montauk Harbor and Port Jefferson on Long Island. Next slide, please. So now I'd like to just take a brief minute to speak to what Empire State Development's role is in helping companies to reap the benefit of offshore wind. Empire State Development is the economic development arm of New York State government. Our focus is on growing the state economy and creating jobs. I, in particular, am the Director of Industry Development for Renewable Energy within the Strategic Business Division. And our division focuses on the entire state in key industry sectors. So, given the opportunity that I've just described, offshore wind is clearly one of these priority industry sectors. And for projects, for manufacturing projects that are involved in offshore wind, we can assist businesses with incentives for projects to create jobs and have capital investment. Next slide, please. And so that's just my specific role within ESD, but there are other divisions, and I'll just briefly mention some of these, and they can assist businesses and people in different ways. So there is the regional offices. There are 10 of them across the state. We have additionally a global division, which maintains offices across the world in various countries. Additionally, there is a small business division. And finally, there is the Division of Minority and Women-Owned Business Development, which is a one-stop hub for MWBE success in New York. Next slide, please. So an example that I'd like to go over is of a company that worked with Empire State Development, and it provides a very good success story. So in October, Governor Hochul announced the largest single offshore wind supply chain contract in New York State to date, which is to support the state's Sunrise Wind project. And Ørsted and Eversource are joint development partners for that project. And they signed an $86 million supply chain contract to construct advanced foundation components for wind turbines at the Port of Queen Anne's. And what this did was bring jobs in construction and steel manufacturing to two different companies in New York State. The one that I would like to use an example is Ljungstrom of Wellsville in Allegheny County, which is rural western New York. Ljungstrom will manufacture the steel components and deliver them to the Port of Queen Anne's. This is going to create 100 jobs in western New York. And Ljungstrom did a great job of doing their homework and preparing for this. And, you know, as a part of that, Empire State Development became involved to provide them with a Excelsior Jobs tax credit incentive to be able to make help make the project possible. And what they did was they transitioned from a fossil fuel power generation business into the renewable energy industry. So this 90-year-old company successfully pivoted their business to reap the economic benefits of the offshore wind industry. So really powerful example, and we hope to see many more of these. Next slide, please. Next year, NYSERDA will be holding their third solicitation to procure offshore wind energy from developers. And New York State has structured these solicitations in a way that promotes economic benefits. Developers put together offers to install wind turbines and then sell the energy to New York. And the scoring is 70% price, 20% economic benefits, and 10% project viability. So this gives New York a way to push developers to offer packages that include job creation and business development opportunities for New Yorkers. And this has proven to be a very effective method in pushing for these economic benefits with the developers. Next slide, please. And here's a quick highlight of some of the results, I think, that have come from this 20% economic benefit criteria. As I mentioned before, there are 5 ports in active development in New York. These developments are centering around emerging in 3 key regions of New York State. So the Capital Region, New York City, and Long Island. And I'm fortunate enough today to have 3 other presenters alongside me today that are going to bring a more local perspective on the economic benefits for offshore wind in their 3 respective regions. Next slide, please. So first, let me just say thank you very much for letting me share some high-level economic benefits of offshore wind with you. This is a topic that I'm truly passionate about because I know how big of a difference this is going to make, for New York. And, so thank you again. I will be around until the end for questions and answers. And now let me introduce you to a friend and colleague who has been a great partner to Empire State Development in the pursuit of these economic benefits of offshore wind. Katie Newcombe is the Chief Economic Development Officer for the Center of Economic Growth in the Capital Region. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Katie.
Thank you so much, Dave. ESD is a fantastic partner. It truly takes a team to help move these projects forward. And thank you to NYCERDA for having me here today, and to just excited to be alongside my fellow presenters. So I'm going to talk a little bit about opportunities in offshore wind in New York's capital region. And I'll start with a little quip that I use often. I've been telling people that I've been working on offshore wind, and they say to me, well, what do you mean you're working on offshore wind? You're in Albany, New York. You're not on the coast. Like, what's happening in offshore wind in Albany, New York? And so I'm hoping that by the end of the presentation today, you'll all understand Albany's prominence and Albany's position as a leader in offshore wind, and the opportunity that can follow. Next slide, please. So as David said, I'm with a group called the Center for Economic Growth, or CEG. We are a nonprofit, largely investor-funded economic development organization serving New York's capital region, anchored by Albany, New York. The region consists of 8 counties, and we have a little over 1 million people. What does CEG do? We proactively market the region, develop strategies, implement those strategies to really try to attract investment and talent. We have dedicated programming and team members to help grow our manufacturing and workforce, leverage industry clusters. Clean energy and offshore wind is one of those clusters, and help build out our entrepreneurial ecosystem. We also work to help the region compete. So a lot of regional research and analysis, regional strategies, sites and buildings, inventory in the region. So just to really be prepared for opportunity and for investment. And then we bring partners together, right? So we have this 8-county macro view, and that affords us a position to bring together public, private, and academic organizations to really help facilitate projects and break down barriers and move forward as a region. And we also work alongside our state and local economic developers. So NYCERDA and ESD are both really important partners. So when we talk about offshore wind, many partners, including CEG, have been working for years to position the capital region as a location of choice for component manufacturers and supply chain to serve the offshore wind industry. The region has best-in-class port assets and workforce and manufacturing capabilities, a long legacy of both that are necessary to compete. So as CEG, we've been working on supply chain, workforce, industry attraction, really building a consortium of leaders in the region and across the state to help realize these opportunities. Next slide, please. And so David did a really great job of framing up the opportunity that New York is creating, right? So New York is hands down the undisputed leader, right, with 9,000 megawatts, and they are animating the market. But it's not just New York. There's significant federal support right now for the industry. And that federal support is helping to provide clarity in the market and certainty. And that certainty is really important because the more certainty we have, the more likely US states are going to see investment in the domestic supply chain. So I just want to take us out here and say, okay, we know what's happening in New York, but what else is driving this market and what else is driving this economic opportunity? So next slide, please. So not only do we have the support of our federal government, and you do not have to try to read all the detail on this slide, but there's also a massive project pipeline or potential project pipeline along the eastern seaboard. And other states are building, offshore wind and going after this industry, but not at the scale of New York. And when you add it all up, there's huge market potential, and that market is moving really fast. So New York solicitation, along with other smaller Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states, are creating this robust pipeline, and developers are responding. And that pipeline is really critical, right? Because without it, you're not going to see the component manufacturers set up new operations. And so we're starting to see these investments in our ports, and we're starting to see states animate the market. And a lot of the supply chain has been in Europe, and we want that supply chain in the US. We want it in New York, and I want it in the capital region. And we think that our central location and our port assets really position us in an ideal place. Next slide, please. So bear with me, I'm giving you the macro scale just a little bit more. So we talk about a robust pipeline, massive even, but massive is not a technical term. So how big is that supply chain opportunity? So by 2030, we believe that, or it's projected that there's $109 billion revenue opportunity for businesses in the supply chain. So over the next decade, $109 billion opportunity. And so we want to ensure that New York State manufacturers are able to tap into that. And again, you know, New York is leading. The aggressive pursuit of the industry, combined with what's happening in other states, the support at the federal level, you know, this just is an immense opportunity. And again, you know, big thank you to NYCERDA for their forward thinking and the forward thinking of the ports that are in Albany County, the Port of Albany and the Port of Queens, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. They came together, support of the city of Albany, Albany County, and then CEG just really aggressively pursuing the industry. The capital region is becoming an emerging hub for the manufacturing of component parts. Next slide. And we are seeing that in our ports. And so the Port of Albany will host the nation's first offshore wind tower manufacturing facility. This comes with the redevelopment of 80 acres and about 600,000 square feet of manufacturing space. They'll also manufacture transition pieces there as well. And the job count is 550 jobs, and 550 jobs located next to a neighborhood that has traditionally seen disinvestment and perhaps hasn't been connected to opportunity. And we'll talk a little bit about that workforce opportunity later in the presentation. But, you know, a real look at how do you combine investment in this from this emerging industry with opportunity in neighborhoods that have traditionally been disconnected. So that is a big part of the narrative and a big part of the conversations that we're having here in the region. So just, you know, massive $350 million investment, lots of jobs, and signaling to the world that Albany is in the game. And this really, I just want to thank the Port of Albany too. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm talking on the next slide. I didn't ask you to advance. There we go. So that's everything that I just said. And again, this is really the leadership of the Port of Albany to ready this site and to de-risk it and to make it, you know, a viable development option. Next slide. And then our another port in our region, the Port of Queens, just recently it was announced that Sunrise Wind through Ørsted and Eversource will be assembling advanced foundation components. So they will assemble them at the Port of Queens, much like the way that the towers will be manufactured, and then will be floated down the Hudson. I probably should have said that. Floated down the Hudson to project areas downstate. So advanced foundation components, as Dave said, this is the largest supply chain contract award to date, and it will carry with it 115 good union paying jobs at the Port of Queens. Next slide, please. And then, so what has CEG been doing, right, to harness this economic opportunity? And I think that this is, you know, replicable in other regions and replicable in other industries, quite frankly. But we've really worked hard with our partners to develop what we call a fully enabled region, right? Really looking at every aspect of this industry and how you maximize that. And so we put together our playbook. And so you know, we're leading this as a cluster strategy to capture that opportunity. And so we're working to attract component manufacturers, really promoting the region as a location of choice. But we also know that, you can attract in, but you need to grow your own. So we've launched a supply chain study for the region. We're working with a firm called Exodus. I think that you've had them on the Leading from Experts, so you may have heard from them in the past if you've participated in these webinars before. But we're working to take a look at what are our existing manufacturing capabilities? How do we help our manufacturers tap into this market? Where are the gaps? And there'll be a competitive assessment as part of this as well. So how does our region stack up to similarly situated regions in other states? And then we're working around workforce development, and there's a couple different areas where we're focusing on that. We are very grateful to Ørsted and Eversource. CEG will be managing $1 million workforce development fund, specifically targeting, working with labor and then targeting folks that have traditionally been disconnected from opportunities, and helping them develop skills and gain employment. Coalition building, make sure that everybody understands the opportunity within this industry and how they can tap into it. Building those bridges, especially with our manufacturers and our workforce partners, and reaching out to people who know more than we do. So we've really relied on learning from folks like the Danes and how they've built out their, how they've built this industry out, and what model and what we should be thinking about for the future. And then probably one of the busiest places, and I think our other partners would say this too, is around workforce development. And so just highlighting a few of those partnerships. Hudson Valley Community College, really the power of our community college system in New York, looking at welding programs and mechatronics and turbine certification. So really responding to industry needs. And I would say that's the same for our BOCES network. And how, with BOCES, how do you reach into those communities, again, that have traditionally been disconnected from opportunity, and provide those services and provide those wraparound services? And then finally, I want to highlight a first of its kind program in the Capital Region. So the Greater Capital Region Building and Trades Construction Council launched a multi-craft apprenticeship preparation program, and they specifically launched it in Albany South End, and that is the neighborhood that's adjacent to the Port of Albany. And it really is to work with communities that have been underserved and help provide a direct entry into good paying union jobs. And so we're really excited to see that investment in Albany South End and connect it to the potential in offshore wind. So I went very fast, but that is the end of our program. And I hope you now know a little bit more about how Albany fits into offshore wind and the opportunities there. So thank you so much. And turning it over to my friend and colleague, Nse. I'm talking about the Capital Region, but the Capital Region and Brooklyn and Long Island, we are all intimately connected, right? This all benefits New York State, and we have worked very well together. So, Nse, over to you.
Thanks so much for that, Katie. Thanks for that great presentation. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nse Esema, as Katie shared, and I work with the New York City Economic Development Corporation, which I'll tell you a little bit about before sharing the ways that we are also working to realize the economic benefits and potential of the offshore wind industry in New York City. Next slide, please. So the New York City Economic Development Corporation, or EDC, as we are sometimes called, is a quasi-governmental entity. And our mission is to build strong neighborhoods and grow good jobs across the 5 boroughs of New York City. So the mayor of New York City appoints our board and our president. We focus on strengthening communities, building a sustainable city, developing talent in our workforce, and sparking innovation. So in addition to various programmatic services, we manage over 65 million square feet of diverse real estate assets on behalf of the city of New York. We hold the maritime contract for New York City. So many of the assets we oversee come from the Department of Ports and Trade, which was dissolved in the early 90s. And this includes the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, which David pointed out during his presentation, and I'll talk a little bit more about during mine, and is slated to be a hub for the staging and installation and operations and maintenance for Equinor's offshore wind projects and beyond. In September, the mayor released an offshore wind vision plan for New York City. And this vision plan really lays out our strategy for leveraging the economic benefits that we believe the industry can reap for New York City in a way that prioritizes equity with a specific focus on communities who have disproportionately borne the brunt of the climate crisis. So over the next 15 years, the city is going to invest almost $200 million to support the industry. Next slide, please. So again, our jurisdiction is over the 5 boroughs, so Staten Island, Brooklyn, Manhattan, the Bronx, and Queens. Again, we've talked about the importance of the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal for the offshore wind industry, but we also believe, and so that's in Brooklyn, but we also believe that offshore wind can create economic benefits for each borough, even if in different ways. And I'll say a bit more about that shortly. But first and foremost, there's a few reasons why New York City is positioned to generate economic benefits from the industry, just geographically, right? So we are a close jumping off point for all the activity in Albany that Katie described. That's going to be floating down the Hudson River. And we're in close proximity to Empire Wind. A little around 15 miles from the Empire Wind project, and are the closest point for a lot of upcoming lease areas, which you see in the small map with the blue and green shaded areas. We're in close proximity to a lot of those lease areas, which are on track to be released by the federal government in the coming months for offshore wind farms. Next slide, please. So with this geographic advantage, we are working to leverage the city's expertise in maritime infrastructure development, our world-class talent base and workforce development system, and our capacity for innovation across sectors, all while centering an equity focus to ensure that New York City can, play a really important role in the industry. And so, as I mentioned, we released this vision plan, and we commit ourselves to 3 core strategies for leveraging these economic benefits. The first is around developing the infrastructure that will support the construction and operation of offshore wind farms throughout the New York Bight. The second is preparing local workers and businesses to seize upon the opportunities that will be created by these infrastructure investments. Excuse me. And then finally, the third is to promote innovation in offshore wind to ensure that new technologies and approaches are created in New York City. We've established an advisory council comprised of industry experts and critical stakeholders to help us achieve these strategies. Next slide, please. So we have local assets and actors throughout the city that are relevant for each of those 3 strategies. And in this map, we've noted, for the sites and infrastructure strategy, brownfield sites and marine facilities, docking and berthing sites operating in New York City that we think can play a role in the industry. We've noted spaces where startups and industry are converging to develop innovations that can be relevant to the industry. And then finally, our educational and training institutions that are preparing workers who can enter the industry. So we're really excited that we have a lot of local assets that are institutional and physical assets that are really well positioned to help drive this industry and to help New York City realize the economic benefits from this industry. Next slide. So I'll take you briefly through a couple examples of how New York City is generating economic benefits across each of those 3 strategies. So for the first one around sites and infrastructure, currently our sort of premier port for supporting offshore wind in New York City, the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, which I mentioned earlier. It is a 66-acre maritime facility in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, and Equinor is actively working with the JV that manages the site, the Sustainable South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, to activate it for staging and installation and operations and maintenance of offshore wind farms, both for Equinor's projects and long beyond that. So once activated, this port is going to create hundreds of jobs and economic opportunity, again, in connection with Empire Wind and Beacon Wind, but also beyond. When I say beyond, there's both, we're talking about this like generational opportunity that we have for the offshore wind industry. So there's that, but then also Equinor will have a 30% MWDBE, minority, women, and disadvantaged business enterprise utilization target to meet, 50% local hiring, 40% retention, and 30% advancement goals for the workforce too. So those types of targets and goals are part of what we mean and part of what we are trying to bring to life when we talk about the economic benefits that this industry really portends. Next slide, please. So in addition to the economic benefits to be created by investing in sites and infrastructure, and to be clear, the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal is just one of the many sites and infrastructure that we'll be investing in. I just wanted to share a couple examples across the three strategies. But in addition to what's been generated in that pillar, we are also investing in research and innovation for offshore wind and clean energy. So working with the offshore wind industry and local innovation partners, we are supporting the launch of an offshore wind focused accelerator for startups. We're also planning on leveraging federal government funding for R&D to partner with research institutions to advance the development of new products and services for offshore wind. These efforts around innovation will allow New York City to build out the next generation of offshore wind technologies that can create local jobs, build the capacity of local academic institutions, and democratize research. Again, all advancing economic benefits of this industry. Next slide, please. So Katie spoke earlier about the economic opportunity for this industry's supply chain, the $109 billion revenue opportunity. So we're, that's a big number, and we're also very much paying attention to that and trying to ensure that, local businesses can be a part of the supply chain. So we are committed to preparing local businesses for offshore wind opportunity. I'll share two strategies we are pursuing in the early stages. So the first is around MWBE capacity building program. As I mentioned earlier, there's a utilization target of 30% of MWDBEs at the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal. And so the target creates the demand for the MWBEs. And then on our side, we are developing a capacity building program that provides education, networking, and resource support for businesses with an interest in the New York City waterfront and offshore wind industry. So that, the demand is then met by the supply of firms, right? So that'll be launching next year. We are also supporting New York City manufacturers, or committed to supporting New York City manufacturers in being a part of this industry. So we're going to be providing industry education, networking, self-certification, and compliance support, and then providing access to capital for machinery and equipment for manufacturing businesses to be able to land contracts in this industry. Next slide, please. And then finally, we know that for the economic benefits and offshore wind opportunity to really usher in a just transition, it's going to require that folks from EJ communities, environmental justice communities, BIPOC communities, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, women, and others who have borne the greatest brunt of the climate crisis are at the table and are working in the industry. And so that means for us that we're taking the development of the offshore wind workforce pipeline really seriously. we think about what it takes to have folks working in the industry in a multi-step way. People need to have initial exposure and an opportunity to develop an interest in the industry. Then they need the relevant training to actually give them the skills to be able to get into the industry. Then support with actually getting a job in the industry. And then finally, making sure that they can actually advance and retain and advance in those jobs. And so we're making a number of investments kind of along that pipeline to support New Yorkers at every stage in the process in getting into offshore wind. There's a bunch of different examples. I want to make sure I leave time for my colleagues to share, so I'll just highlight 2 or 3. So as part of their operations at the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, Equinor has made a number of commitments to ensuring certain community benefits are created by their project, right? So one example of a commitment they've made that fits across this pipeline is their plan to establish and maintain an offshore wind community outreach and educational facility in the neighborhood where their ports and where the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal is located. And so you can see there just a visual of what is actually an existing educational center around recycling. But this is one of the things that has really bubbled up from the community around like an example of what they mean when they advocated for this educational outreach facility. So that's one way of ensuring that folks are exposed to and can have interest in the industry, be seated. Once they have that exposure, then they need to get trained, right? So we're investing millions of dollars in CUNY, the City University of New York, the largest urban public university system in the country, to build their infrastructure that can support their ability to deliver training on offshore wind. So that's another really exciting investment. And there are many others across the pipeline, but just wanted to kind of share those 2 as examples. Finally, we know that many of the jobs in this industry will be unionized, and we are working with pre-apprenticeship and direct entry programs to leverage those as critical access points for getting New Yorkers into the unions that will be building offshore wind projects. And so really delighted to be able to kind of pass the mic to Mariah, who will be delving in on the union opportunity from her perch as the Long Island organizer for Climate Jobs New York. So thanks so much. Over to you, Mariah.
Thanks, Nse, and thank you, NYCERDA, for hosting me and my fellow panelists today. My name is Mariah Dignan, and I'm the Long Island lead for Climate Jobs New York. I'm going to focus on the role organized labor plays in creating good economic benefits for workers and communities in the offshore wind space. And if we do our job right, we want you to think offshore wind jobs are union jobs. Next slide, please. So Climate Jobs New York is a broad and diverse labor coalition representing 2.6 million working New Yorkers, all about advancing a pro-worker and a pro-climate agenda. So we're building alliances, educating our members, and demonstrating that we don't have to choose between a healthy planet and good jobs. We must have climate jobs. And one of the photos here is from a fun community series we host called What's Brewin' Offshore. And I think it's just a good example to highlight the kind of events and ways that we can educate not only our union members, but our communities about offshore wind, but doing so in a fun and different way. We also host labor education sessions, local by local, to really hone in on a particular trade, to show our union members, here's what's happening with climate change. Here are New York's nation-leading clean energy goals. And here is why we need you as a union member to fight to make sure that these jobs are good union jobs. Next slide, please. Why union jobs? Over the past 50 years, we have seen a real lack of respect for working people, profits over people. And right now we have a national union membership rate of about 11%. But the tides are turning. And in a recent Gallup poll, we've seen the highest support for labor unions since 1965. 68% of Americans support the labor movement. And I'm proud to say That support is the highest among young people from 18 to 34. But why are we seeing this trend? It's the basic tenets of the labor movement about social justice, about treating workers with respect and dignity. And when we have power in numbers and we collectively bargain for better wages, benefits, and safer working conditions for our union members, we really see what the true potential of an American dream can be. Non-union workers have a median weekly earning that is about 84% of the earnings of workers who are union members. And when we look among retirement plans, 91% of union workers have a retirement plan compared to 65% of non-union workers. And next to the military, we have the most robust and premier training programs in the country, where you earn while you learn a trade, and you can have a real career pipeline to create communities of union members, because not only are we union members, but we're community members as well, to be able to own a home, to buy a car, make those mortgage and car payments without worry, to have kids and to send them to whatever education and training programs that they could be interested in, and be able to live a life with respect and dignity. And that's really what the labor movement is all about, and what we are eager to realize here in the offshore wind industry. Next slide, please. And the great part is that New York is already ahead. As my colleagues pointed to, the CLCPA, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, is nation-leading legislation on clean energy standards for New York. To highlight everyone's near-term goal of 70% renewable electricity by 2030, and what we really want to focus on, and what I want to bring to the table here today, is the legislative wins that we had in the labor movement. In the most recent budget, we were able to secure project labor agreements and prevailing wage for construction of large-scale renewable energy projects, so anything that's over 5 megawatts of energy. In addition to that, we secured labor peace agreements for the long-term 25-year-long operations and maintenance work that'll be necessary. And a labor peace agreement basically is an agreement between an employer and a union saying that the employer will allow and not really get in the way for their employees to organize and form a union. And we also secured Buy American provisions for iron and steel, and incentives to manufacture renewable energy equipment and supplies right here in New York State. Next slide, please. So what do the policies and the legislative wins really mean for working people? It means jobs. 9 gigawatts by 2035 will elicit 10,000 jobs across the state. It'll power 6 million homes. And as my colleagues pointed to previously, real investments, millions and billions of dollars, will be invested in New York, from port facilities to research and development to create cutting-edge technologies, and wind tower manufacturing up in the capital region. All in all, we're only halfway. 4.3 gigawatts have been procured in the process of contracting in New York. And all of that will create 6,800 jobs, from project development to manufacturing to the construction and installation and operations and maintenance of these facilities. And on March 29th, the Biden administration announced plans to build enough offshore wind in the next 10 years to power over 10 million American homes, with that 30 gigawatt by 2030 goal. And right now, the US is lagging behind Europe and Asia with offshore wind. But with these goals to accelerate growth, we'll really be able to catch up, and we're going to catch up fast. Building 30 gigawatts will create over 44,000 direct jobs and support another 33,000 in related industries. Next slide, please. And this may look familiar, especially if you've been on this Learning from the Experts series and anything to do with NYCERDA, because it's such a great image. But this is the overall picture in New York, right? The Biden administration has really kickstarted our green energy economy by declaring new wind energy areas in the New York Bight. So not only will we have the development that you're seeing on the screen now, but there will be additional areas as soon as next year to have an auction to meet not only our 9 gigawatt goal, but other regional goals. And honestly, I think 9 gigawatts will just be the start of it. I think we're going to see a lot more to come from offshore wind in New York State. But as Katie said earlier, these investments and new wind energy areas are key in increasing competition, bringing more developers into the fold, and creating confidence for our workers that this industry is real and it's happening. A Wood Mackenzie report released last year showed that this area, we're referring to the New York Bight alone, could create up to 83,000 jobs through the next decade. But what kind of jobs? 25,000 jobs in development and construction from 2022 to 2030. An additional 7,000 jobs in communities and indirect jobs like recreational, hospitality, taking tours of the turbines, so tourism jobs as well. And in addition to that, we're talking about 4,000 operations and maintenance jobs annually and more indirect jobs in the years following to build out this infrastructure and this new clean energy offshore wind economy. When we look at the map, you see areas that are highlighted like Port Jefferson Harbor, Montauk Harbor, and we're seeing real commitments from developers to create jobs. So over in Port Jefferson, up on the North Shore of Long Island, we're talking about over 100 long-term operations and maintenance jobs at the hub. That'll be in Port Jefferson, and the regional operations and maintenance for Ørsted Eversource will be here on Long Island in a facility in East Setauket, which is right near Port Jeff, for those who may not be familiar with the Long Island geography. And in addition to that, we have a $10 million investment in a national offshore wind training center that'll be hosted right here on Long Island in the town of Brookhaven. And this will utilize our apprenticeship programs and provide GWO or Global Wind Organization training to workers in order to go out 2 weeks off shore, 2 weeks back on to work on these turbines. In addition to Ørsted and Eversource's investments, Equinor also, as you've heard, has made commitments up in the capital region for 500 short-term jobs and 300 long-term jobs for their tower manufacturing. But we want to be sure that these jobs are not only high-wage and high-paying jobs, but they're good family-sustaining union jobs. Next slide, please. And this slide gives you a little bit more of a sense of the types of jobs and titles we're talking about when it comes to this. We fought really hard in the labor movement to be sure that the construction and installation of offshore wind is union, but we're just getting started. As you can see, we need to be sure that the developing and permitting, the engineers, the financial analysts, the scientists and marine specialists who look at the geotechnical surveys and samplings of the beaches and the offshore, there's a wide range of career pipelines that are going to be available for offshore wind and are currently being solicited right now. The manufacturing, we talk a lot about building back better, right? We need to revitalize American manufacturing and domestic supply chains in order to realize this clean energy economy. If you move to the next slide, please. And I'll just wrap up by saying that the climate crisis requires immediate action to lower our greenhouse gas emissions and rebuild our economy based on clean energy, efficiency, and frankly, resilience. But at the same time, there's growing inequality of wealth, power, and income that can undermine the potential of the United States. And we want to build a diverse and progressive labor movement and forge strong coalitions with my fellow panelists, with industry, governments, and EJ communities. And only then will we really have the potential and economic power necessary to confront these intersecting crises and win the bold action we all deserve. So thank you for your time. My contact information is there, and I'm looking forward to questions with my fellow panelists.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Mariah, and thank you to all of our panelists. We do have a few minutes left for Q&A. So just to remind participants, you could submit questions in the Q&A feature, and we will try to get to them with the time that we have. We have about 5 minutes, and I know, Katie, you need to jump off. So I'm going to start the Q&A with some questions directed to you. But of course, this is a panel, so I'll distribute the questions to each of you, but please feel free to chime in if there's more to be said. So one question I have for you, Katie, is how do I know if my business is a good match for the offshore wind industry?
Sure. So I would say if you are a manufacturer, your first call should be to a manufacturing extension partnership or an MEP center. Each region in New York State has a designated MEP center, and they can work with that manufacturer to determine, whether to help them enter new markets, offshore wind being one of them, to determine what certifications are needed, help them obtain those certifications. So I would start with your manufacturing extension partnership. And then I would look out to the supply chain databases. So NYCERDA has a supply chain database that is widely used. Many of the developers have their own supply chain databases. And then I would say another good one is the Business Network for Offshore Wind. So NYCERDA and the Business Network, I think, are the first two places to start for a supply chain database and your manufacturing extension partnership.
Awesome. Thank you. I will say too, you mentioned the supply chain database. It's a very great resource to connect businesses. And as part of the solicitations, also it is a requirement that contracts over 5 million that the developer and tier 1 contractors consult that database. So it's a very important resource. Thank you for mentioning it. A question here, last one for you, Katie, before you got to jump, is about workforce. How do I get the skills needed to get a job in the offshore wind industry?
So I think it really is working through your workforce development system. So I would, I think you want to start to see what jobs, first want to see what jobs are available in your area, because the jobs in Albany may be different than the jobs in Brooklyn, for instance. So there may be more operations and maintenance in one area and more manufacturing related type employment in another area. So I think you want to go out, you want to see what jobs are posted, what skill sets are being required. But you can also work with your regional workforce development boards and your one-stop centers to see, how you enter into that employment, and be looking for training programs. So our community colleges are really stepping up, and again, our BOCES systems and our trade organizations and our partners in labor. So I think it's what jobs are in your area. What are those resources that you can sit down and have the conversation with someone to understand how you enter into that. And I would throw that over to my other panelists as well, because they may have some additional insight into that.
Yeah, I think everything Katie said is spot on. The one thing I would just add to that is to really explore the timeline for what jobs are becoming available when in your area. So this offshore wind opportunity is a generational opportunity. We're trying to build an industry that's going to last decades and decades. That doesn't mean that there are jobs in every particular vertical available today. There are a lot of jobs available today, but that might not necessarily crisscross with exactly what you're looking for. So do that research too of when the jobs that you're interested in will be coming available in your area.
Thank you for that. That leads really well into another question we have, which is, when will jobs become available for the offshore wind industry? All right. I have one here for you, Mariah, which is, what steps can I take to get my business ready to participate in the offshore wind industry?
Sure, thanks for that. And I think really attending sessions like this, learning what's going to come, and seeing what the timeline, as Nse and Katie were talking about, is going to be. But for us in the labor movement, I mean, it's all about our apprenticeship programs and pre-apprenticeship programs that are direct entry into the trades. So we have great, on Long Island, we have a pre-apprenticeship program called Opportunities Long Island that really focuses on low-income and minority communities to give them the skills, like the math skills, a little bit of like the soft skills that are necessary to get into an apprenticeship program. We also in the labor movement, we have initiatives like non-traditional employment for women, the helmets to hard hats, working with our veteran population to make sure that they're able to get a good union job in the construction trades. But in addition to, the construction and apprenticeship programs with the labor movement here on Long Island, we have over 200 local manufacturers. So we're working on similar mapping for the state and working on an actual manufacturing tour early next year that we will bring together developers, suppliers, the counties, IDAs, and local economic development folks to really bring everyone in the same room and come and tour these facilities to see what the businesses here have to offer for the smaller components of the supply chain, because the big stuff is going to happen up in the capital region, as Katie talked about earlier. But we are really uniquely positioned to work on those smaller components. So we're all walking and chewing gum at the same time as we learn with this industry, but just staying connected and being that kind of partner, I think folks and local businesses can really learn what they could potentially have to offer. And as my contact information, let's all figure this out together.
Awesome. Thank you, Mariah. I know we are at time, but I think we have, if you guys want to stay on for a little bit, I'll ask a couple more questions. And of course, it'll be preserved in the recording so people can enjoy this later. David, I wanted to ask you, how are you fostering economically beneficial collaborations for workforce development and small, diverse firms with the larger firms and government agencies?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. Empire State Development is involved with, in partnership with NYCerda, folks like CEG, and others, regionally on workforce development initiatives. And, we're on committees that assist with that. Primarily those workforce partnerships are run regionally and funded through NYCerda programs, but Empire State Development is happy to, assist and steer those as needed. But I would defer to, regional partners for direct involvement with those.
All right, thanks, David. And last question for you, Nse. What support exists for MWBE businesses seeking to participate in the offshore wind industry?
Yeah, so as I was explaining before, in New York City, we are going to be launching an MWBE capacity building program specifically for MWBE firms in the kind of construction space, firms who have an interest in working on the waterfront or offshore. We are leveraging, as I mentioned, we manage over 65 million square feet of assets on behalf of the city, and a lot of that is maritime assets. And so we're leveraging that portfolio in conjunction with this growing offshore wind opportunity to really create capacity building and growth opportunities for MWBEs. So stay tuned to that. We're currently, we've just closed an RFP for a consultant who's going to be designing that program in partnership with us, and expect to be able to start recruiting firms to participate in that by like middle of next year, early mid next year. So stay tuned, be on the lookout.
Awesome, that's super exciting. All right, I think that's about all the time we have. So we'll wrap up here. Thank you for joining. Thank you to our panelists. So thanks for joining us in this Learning from the Experts webinar. Just a reminder that this webinar recording and the presentation slides will be available at nyserda.ny.gov/osw-webinar-series. If you navigate to the offshore wind page, I'm sure you'll find it. The next webinar will be announced on NYSERDA's events page, and an email blast is coming in the next few days, so stay tuned for that. You can register for future webinars through our events page at wind.ny.gov. And if you have requests for future topics you would like to hear about in this series, please email us at offshorewind@nyserda.ny.gov. So thank you again for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.